All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very special talk titled Tainted Love, Valentine's Day and Romance Scams. I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Anshul Rege, and I'm an associate professor and the director of the Cybersecurity and Application Research and Education Care lab here at Temple University. I'm honored to have with us two of my favorite people who don't really need an introduction, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. So first, we have Elise Dennis, who is a senior consultant at Critical Insight. She is best known for social engineering, open source intelligence, security awareness training, and performance security assessments in both the private and public sectors, including critical infrastructure organizations. Elise was awarded a DEF CON badge, Black Badge, at DEF CON 27 for winning the 10th annual Social Engineering Capture the Flag contest. She's a frequent conference speaker and podcast guest, including DerbyCon and B-Side San Francisco, as well as an appearance on the Darknet Diaries podcast. Finally, she acts as an Innocent Lives Foundation ambassador and a founding member of DC 209, a DEF CON group. And my personal favorite, Alethe has served as a judge for the Collegiate Social Engineering Capture the Flag competition that we host here at Temple University for 2 years now. So thank you, Alethe, for that.
Thanks for having me.
And next, I want to introduce Ronnie Takazowski, who is a principal threat advisor at CoFence, where he specializes in fighting and understanding all angles of business email compromise. He has experience fighting advanced persistent threat attacks, reversing malware, and enjoys taking cyber criminals for long walks off of short piers. I'm so grateful for the many chats I've had with Ronnie, especially over the last couple of months over scams. And what I really love is that he's always ready to help. So thank you both for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedules and coming out today to talk about a very important topic.
Thanks for having us.
So with that, I want to set the stage for our listeners right before we dive in. According to the Federal Trade Commission, victims of romance scams lost $201 million in 2019, which was a stark 40% increase since 2018, more than a six-fold increase from 2015. And in 2020, romance scam losses totaled approximately $304 million, which was a 50% increase from 2019. Just yesterday, we saw an article that came out that said romance scams were up 90% during the pandemic. So clearly, this is an important issue. And I want to start with the scam process itself. Now, I think we're kind of already familiar with it, right? Scammers create a fake profile, initiate contact, and groom the victims, introduce tragedies, extract monies, and possibly re-victimize individuals through blackmail and extortion, or laundering, getting them to launder, funds or traffic drugs. So I want to ask both of you to walk us through these stages with your expertise, right? From a social engineering lens, as well as a psychological persuasion, right? What impact does it have? So let's start with step one, creating a fake profile. So how does social engineering and psychology come into play? And Elise, let's start with you and then we'll get to Ronnie.
Sure. So most of these scammers will create probably an entire roster of sock puppet accounts in most cases. And a sock puppet account is just an alias social media account that they use to lure their victims into creating this relationship with them. This can be a romantic relationship. Sometimes it can just be a friendship. So I don't want to get too far down the road here, but they may position themselves as either an attractive person that you want to be romantically involved with, or just friendly with, or somebody that can position themselves as an expert and perhaps use a pretext, pretend to be someone that's an authority on a topic to build trust and rapport with you. So they're going to build out this account to have an attractive profile picture. Sometimes, especially in the case where they're using a pretext of a woman, the pictures may be a little too attractive, if you follow my drift. They're also going to build that bio of that account out to really make them seem like an attractive person to get in touch with. The scammer will then use this account once they've built it out with enough pictures and history to make it look like a real account. Then they will start using that to contact people. One of the first indicators that an account is not legitimate is that it's following very few or followed by very few people. Of course, these people can actually pay services to add followers to their account. So if that follow to follower and following ratio seems a little bit off, that's sometimes a good indicator that the account is not controlled by a real person or that it is a very new account. Ronnie, is there anything you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, so once the accounts are created, or almost before that happens, your scammer needs to have pictures. They need to have content in order to post up. And one of the things that we've seen is a lot of the pictures that get used are either models or people who are extremely rich, or they'll go right on Facebook and start scraping profile pictures right from there. And the difficulty with that is that when it comes to trying to do a reverse image search, they'll even doctor the picture up enough to where it bypasses those algorithms. So in the past, we used to say, hey, just do a reverse image search, you're good. But like with the way these attacks are unfolding now, like you can't do that anymore. They'll mess with the hue, they'll mess with the saturation, they'll mess with some of that stuff on it. And like I said, it becomes a point where it becomes almost indetectable for a lot of these cases. And in addition to that, on the psychology side, a lot of victims do get love bombed where the scammers will continuously send love to them and to say all these loving things, make them feel extra special. And the victims get emotionally hooked. On the psychology side of it and physiologically, there's a lot of things that happen with those emotions, so much that it becomes a dopamine and oxytocin problem at that point, where it's extremely difficult for a lot of these victims to actually get out of. And that's one of the sentiments I've heard a lot is that, oh, these victims are stupid, they're naive, they need to not be in it. But like, it's actually a biology thing at this point, not just somebody getting tricked into stuff. So there's a lot more at play here than we initially realized when starting to track this.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And we're going to revisit some of these, sort of topics as we move forward. So, I guess step 2, right? Initiating contact and grooming the victims. Now, when I was researching this stage, I found that this could range anywhere from 1 month, 6 months to multiple years. So what is going on here, right? And Ronnie, let me start with you this time, and then we'll get to Elise.
Yeah, so in the grooming stage, it usually happens through different chat channels. So I've seen cases where victims are targeted on Facebook, they're targeted on different dating websites. You can even get into like niche fantasy websites where they'll be targeted on. But once that conversation happens, you usually have the victims talking back and forth with their scammers. In many cases, they will try and move those conversations off of that platform onto something like SMS or WhatsApp in order to kind of keep that person in direct contact. Because in addition to that, it makes it seem more real to them. So if someone's texting me, they're texting me from a US number. Why would I raise any questions on that? So they do that in order to help legitimize it. And as that process goes on, they say very loving things like, I love you, you're the love of my life, let's go spend the rest of our lives together. So they really play on those emotions of those victims. And I've seen cases all the way up to over a decade that some of these victims have been in. And in working with some of the victims, it's pretty apparent that to that victim, they truly and utterly believe that they're in a relationship. So much so that in one case I was looking at, the victim straight up had a preference for how the scammer had dressed. So it was something where they were less formal. They were in a more rural area, and they preferred the more rural individual as opposed to the person who's all gussied up and stuff. So know that with a lot of these victims, they, in their minds and in their heads, they truly believe they're in this relationship. And trying to badger and just be aggressive with them, it just won't work. They'll instantly shut down in that case.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the attackers are going to use various tools to identify victims. In some cases, especially with, and Anshul and I have talked about this in the past, but for those who haven't seen it, I had a series of tweets that I sent out last year when I was approached by somebody who wanted to be my sugar daddy. And the way that person was identifying potential targets was he was going through and identifying people on Instagram that were in InfoSec, which I found hilarious because several other people were approached by the same individual. When I started talking about it on Twitter, there were bots that started picking up the keywords baby daddy and then started approaching me to offer the same services. And if I engaged with those tweets, I'm sure that a scammer would take up the conversation and then quickly try to move it to WhatsApp, which is very common. If you're ever asked to move a conversation to WhatsApp within the first few hours or days, don't. And if you decide that you can't keep your curiosity at bay, when you do, have a look at that WhatsApp profile. And if it says that it's a business account for that WhatsApp number, that's also a major indicator that it's a like a call center or an operation where they have a number of people that are working the same scam with all of the targets. So everybody's got access to this business WhatsApp account and can reply instantly to the messages that are coming through as a team. So it's a team effort, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, definitely a very, very organized. And I want to maybe have a chat with that about that a little bit later, but let's move on to that next step, right? So we've been connecting with each other now. We've been communicating for a while. Obviously, there's a bond that's been established between the scammer and the victim. And then, of course, someone's going to fall sick or get into an accident or, and there's multiple pretexts, right, that are going on. And so just that curiosity, right? Like what's going on here from a social engineering lens and from a psychological lens? And why do they keep sending money? Why is that going on, right? You'd think you'd figure it out, but what's going on? Elise?
I think it really boils down to creating that emotional bond with the target. So the scammer has leveraged this relationship to create an emotional bond with the target, and the target wants to believe that this is real. I don't think anyone can truly be scammed unless they want to believe that what they're hearing is real. In the back of their mind, if they really sat down and thought about it, and some even may suspect, I'm being taken advantage of here at the very minimum, but they want to believe this is real. And that's the first thing. So they allow themselves to believe that this is okay. The second part is that it really comes down to consistency, and our human behavior dictates that we want to remain consistent with our past decisions, because if we go back on what we've previously decided, we're essentially invalidating that decision and we're admitting that we're wrong. Nobody wants to admit that they're wrong. So a lot of this really boils down to remaining consistent with your past decisions. So they might start with something small like, hey, I messed up and I don't have enough money to pay my phone bill. Do you think you can just loan me $60? And they'll loan them that money, and then they may even repay it. Or you say, oh, it was nothing, it's a gift. And then over time, they escalate the requests. And because you've given the small amount of money, now you feel obligated the next time they ask to remain consistent with your behavior and loan them money again, because you trust them, you love them, they've built this rapport, and there's that expectation that you can be trusted by them and that you are going to help them. So you continue to do this, and over time it just escalates and escalates and escalates to the point where it's large sums of money. And they may even phony up bank drafts or doctored looking checks and send you pictures like, I'm sending you the money this week, thanks so much for the loan, and those types of things. And of course they never materialize. But what it boils down to is humans do not want to admit they're wrong, and they want to remain consistent with their past behavior. Secondly, they're emotionally invested in the relationship. And again, as a matter of pride, they don't want to admit that this person has manipulated them. So they continue to want to believe that this person truly cares about them and that they can be trusted in their friend or a, significant other. And so that I think is at the core of it. It's not being able to separate the emotion and actually have a critical, logical, like make a flow chart, like where are the red flags in this relationship? And once you see them on paper and things start to add up, that's a point where you should be able to say, enough is enough. But most people are so emotionally attached to wanting to believe that this relationship's real because they've invested so much time and energy and effort into it, that they're unwilling to accept that that's the fact.
And in addition to that, just kind of help back you up on that. I saw a really, really good TED talk probably a year and a half ago at this point. It was the title of the talk is Honest Liars. And what the talk talks about is it talks about how we lie to ourselves in order to normalize our behavior. Because very much what you were mentioning, Alethe, is that it's something where the victim will say, oh no, I'm just going to go ahead and send this money. I'm going to continue staying in this consistent behavior. But going outside of that is it's physiologically uncomfortable for us because it's something where we want to stay where we are. We don't want to go and make that change. And when we have to go and start making that drastic of a change, we now have to reevaluate everything in our life that we did. So was that money I really sent? Did that go to a scammer? Was this relationship something that was really worth it? When they had me open a bank account, why did the bank call me and everything? So it has the victims end up having to ask a lot of questions during the time. And in addition to that, some of the stuff that I've kind of just been noodling around on is that a lot of the victims end up getting stuck almost in a fight or flight response where they are so emotionally worked up and they can't calm themselves back down that they're not able to think fully through what they're doing. So it almost becomes to a point where they just get so worked up on a lot of these things. I'm not saying it bad to them. I'm just saying it's just a fact of this stuff. But like they just get so worked up that they can't calm themselves down to actually be able to see through what's going on. Whereas if they were able to do that and actually take that step back, take that break, and actually put that phone down and like take 2 days just to like calm down, then they'd be able to approach it with a more level head as opposed to someone who's constantly texting them. With a lot of the victims I've worked with, one of the sentiments like across every single victim is they have a sense of being worn down, where the scammers will constantly badger them and just keep going at them, regardless of whether or not the person sending money. Like they will continuously try and keep that relationship up and constantly hammer them. And again, the Vics get worn down because of how abrasive the scammers are with many of them.
Well, and it kind of leads on to like the next point, and that is if I admit that it's, I'm being taken advantage of, now I'm being put in a position where I have to confront the person because they're just going to continue to badger me if I don't. So now it's, kind of a catch-22. Do I now A, admit I was wrong, B, completely destroy my own ego and pride by admitting that, but now I've got to go confront this person. Most people will avoid the confrontation and they just want the problem to go away. So, it's easier for folks to just say, no, this is fine. Everything's fine. And meanwhile, it's just like flames everywhere.
Yeah. Great meme. And it's interesting that you reference that with how they'll go back and try and confront that person, because I've seen instances where the victims do that. They go and confront the scammer. I had one specific case where the woman attempted to commit suicide. Her mother had her committed. And she texted back to the scammer and she was like, I lost it. I told them everything about you. I tried to commit suicide. My mother had me committed. And instead of the scammer being like, oh, I'm so sorry that you went through that, the scammer's response back was, I'm real. I've always been real. Here's my picture, and had her cashing checks 2 weeks later. So it's something where that's the depth that a lot of these scammers will go. And what the ultimate truth of it is, and it's a hard pill to swallow, is that how we value life and death here is completely different than how a lot of the scammers view life and death. And we can cover those topics here in a little bit, but just know that when it comes to a human life here is different than what a lot of scammers view over where they are.
Especially the life of someone outside of their country. Yeah.
And that's the other thing too, is specifically, this is the scammers' words, not mine. They justify a lot of their behavior and they will straight up go and say, we're going to go and scam the whites. And that's how they justify it, is because they feel like they're making up for lost time and making up for damages that were previously done. And it's something where at the end of the day, 2 wrongs don't make a right here. It's something where like we need to realize that there's a lot more going on than just bad people doing bad things or victims being abused and stuff like that. There's so much more that goes on that people just don't even realize how much they see
their efforts as righteous.
Yep.
And I think that they fully believe that they are doing something that is not only righteous, but admirable.
Mm-hmm.
They're exacting revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're even more motivated because the scammer is emotionally invested in this idea that they are, doing something amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that is really scary.
Yeah. And playing up on that, there's actually a documentary that came out from BBC that was talking about the Black Axe. For those who are unaware, they're a confraternity in Nigeria. And for those who aren't familiar with the confraternity, imagine the concept of a college fraternity mixed with black magic and voodoo. Human sacrifices are a part of that. So it's something that needs to be brought to that too. But in the documentary, they actually went through and interviewed some of the Black Axe members. And in talking with them, you can tell, very much to your point, is that they're very much emotionally involved with it. And there truly is this sense of, I'm trying to right the civil injustice, but that civil injustice is trying to be rectified with murders and stuff, and human sacrifices and abuse. And it's like, again, it just doesn't compute in the whole universe of things. So
yeah, I'm just this is mind-blowing to me, right? And the scary thing, right, especially Elise and Ronnie, the point that you touch on is the different mindsets, right? They don't care, right? Like this is business as usual. This is their everyday part of their everyday routine, right? And so one of the things that I wanted to ask is, okay, this goes on, let's say, for a while until they've squeezed literally everything they possibly could from the victim financially. But that doesn't mean the scam's necessarily done, right?
No. It's just getting good at that point.
It's just getting good. Oh my goodness, yeah. Right? So, but there's this idea of this possibility. I wouldn't even say a possibility. There's like now cases of re-victimization that's going on. And so I've chatted with both of you about this, and in different capacities. I've seen that it's now taken, one of sort of 4 or 5 ways, right? One is, oh yes, you've discovered, talk about confrontation, right, Elise? Like, let's say you do speak up and you say, I realize that you're scamming me. The scammer is going to say, you're right. But guess what? I've actually fallen in love with you, right? So it's sort of that narrative, and that's like really cruel because there is that bond and still that hope, as you said. But then I've also seen some darker, like even more, if I can say, right, where there's sensitive information about you or racy images and videos, right, that you've exchanged over time being used for blackmail or sextortion. And then yet another sort of scary scenario is victims no longer having money, but now being used as resources, right? So either to launder monies or to traffic drugs, right? So it takes very, very different sort of paths. There's possibilities. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, on all of these different possibilities.
I was gonna say I could definitely talk on the money laundering side, just because I see that I've seen that stuff for the last 7 years. But with the way that let me go ahead and take a step back. So I'm gonna segue into this. So one of the areas of crime that I track is called business email compromise, and what it is essentially emails that would come into an organization and say, hey, I need you to do this urgent wire transfer for me. One of the things that we discovered early on was that when you start responding back, the scammers will provide a bank account. They'll be like, hey, here's a name, here's address, here's the amount, here's the routing number, here's all this information you need in order to file this request. So what we found out was that in virtually every single one of those cases where a scammer replies back, that's a romance victim. And the way that the romance victims play into that is the scammers will trick them into opening bank accounts, opening credit cards, opening new lines of credit that they can go and receive these funds. So what will happen is when the victim sees the money and receives it, they will either forward it on to another account on behalf of the scammer. Or actually, that's what they do is they'll forward it on behalf of the scammer. And usually what will happen is that will hit different money muling networks and everybody takes a cut at that point. But what that now becomes is they're now using that romance victim as a money mule to move that money on behalf of that scammer. So now the scammer, all they have to do is say, hey, move this money. And they're not doing anything. They're the ones who aren't moving the money. So not that it gives them plausible deniability in that case, but it's something where we see a lot of cases where victims have no idea what they're doing. I had one case where it was like 3 different scams, but it was a company that thought they were sending a check for an invoice. Check got sent to a work from home victim sent that check to a romance victim deposited $15,000 or $16,000 cash into a bank account, pulled that cash out, and then sent that in a FedEx box up to another state. So in each one of those cases, if you were to go and talk with them, everybody's story would check out, but it's something where that now crossed 4 different state lines just to have that $15,000 cash be sent in the box. So it's something where the way that the scammers operate and with how convoluted and the number of lies that get told and everything, it's extremely difficult to start peeling it away. And a lot of the scammers on ground, I would say they see this as a sense of correlation without causation, because they will go and do different money rituals. They will go and do these different voodoo sacrifices in order to continue extracting more money from their victims. And in their perspective, they see it as working. And it's something where I kind of can't blame them in that regard, because they're getting the money. They see everybody around them still getting money. They see law enforcement not being able to put cuffs on people and stuff like that. And we've had success. We've had over almost 1,500 arrests at this point. But it's something where it becomes a case of correlation without causation, where they see this thing is working, so they continue going harder at it. But it's just something where it's like, we just don't have enough resources on this, unfortunately.
There's also something I really wanted to address here, just as an aside, and that is that we've talked a lot about scammers who are foreign, and I want to make sure that we acknowledge that scammers can be both domestic and foreign. They can also pose as being both domestic and foreign. So what you see is not always what you get. Just because somebody says that they are in the same place you are doesn't mean that they're trustworthy. Just because someone's outside of the place that you are doesn't mean that they're not trustworthy. We've also seen just a variety of different types of attack vectors, similar to what Ronnie was just talking about. You never know what the cliched profile is going to look like. I couldn't tell you. I mean, you can look at a profile and see that it's maybe not quite right. But again, if they've source pictures from elsewhere and modified and cropped them, and reverse image search isn't always going to work in your favor to identify a fake profile. Someone else raised in the questions that they've heard that some victims can even see undeniable proof that the profiles that are being used by the scammers are in fact fake, and that it's a copy of a verified profile or something like that, and they still refuse to believe it. And that just goes back to that emotional investment and that refusal to admit that they were wrong and that their previous actions are in conflict with what they should do now. And I don't think that there's a stereotypical victim either, which was another question that was raised. There's not one type of person that is more likely to fall victim to this type of scam. It just takes the right cocktail of environmental and life, relationship, and influencers on that person's life to make them vulnerable to this kind of attack. Maybe they're lonely, maybe they're going through a divorce, maybe they just wanted to make a friend who also likes model train sets. I mean, there's a variety of different ways that somebody can get sucked into this. And it really comes down to just making sure that, you pump the brakes, take a step back and kind of evaluate a situation and the way somebody's talking to you and the way that they present online. And we'll get into more of that later on, but there's no stereotypes that really we can lean on here to say that, this is your classic victim and this is your only type of scam. This looks a lot different in a lot of different places, and depending on what type of target that they've decided to go after.
And and also one thing on there too, just to kind of help piggyback on that. So we keep referencing victims and we keep referencing people. They're the same. they're the exact same. You could be walking down the street and that random person walking next to you could be a victim. And it's something where anybody could be a victim on any of these crimes is the thing. So it's not just elderly. It's not just anybody could be a victim on this stuff.
Even people in information security can be victims to these kind of things.
Yep.
And it just all boils down to what that person's mental, emotional state is that day that they received that initial request. And if they are willing to engage with that person and make a connection. I'm sure everyone has heard of the Tinder swindler, and we'll get into some of these types of more popular scams as we go, I believe. But, you know, that person did a excellent job of creating this alias profile, this sock puppet that they used, and everything was super convincing. The people that he targeted Googled him and found all sorts of substantiating evidence that supported the lie of who this person was. And they used the resources of other people to scam more people. And it was just this endless Ponzi scheme cycle of using funds from previous victims to influence the current victim, and, you know, so on and so on. So I would absolutely recommend checking that out if you haven't already on Netflix. It's called The Tinder Swindler.
Yep.
You can happily Google it as well.
Yep, it's a very, very good movie. I actually watched it, I think it was like 3 days ago. Yeah, highly recommended.
Yeah, and so I got lots of golden nuggets there. And I'm like, ooh, I want to ask this, and this now, right? So one of the, I guess, questions is, you know, Alethe, going back to the point that you said, you know, they don't have to be international, they could be domestic, right? And so I want to, I guess, use this a little bit as a segue to talk about why is it that we always, right, say, oh, okay, it's a scam, it's Nigeria, right? Like right there, off the, it's always from Nigeria when we know, and this is with romance scams and scams in general, this is happening all over the world, right? There have been scammers that are in Russia and the Philippines and India, right? All sorts of places. And of course, in-house, right here in the US. So why'd they get the bad rep, number one? Number two, what's going on, right? In terms of sort of this worldwide sort of scene. And what does that mean, right? In terms of how we start addressing some of these things. So whoever wants to tackle it, go for it.
I was gonna say, I could definitely take that Nigeria angle too. So to answer your question on why Nigeria always gets the bad rap on that. And to the folks from Nigeria on here, hello, I'm not going to be bad mouthing you. I know there's folks on here. I invited a couple friends, so there are folks from Nigeria on here. So hello to those on the other side of the pond. But to answer the question on why Nigeria, so we have to kind of take a step back about 40 years, back to like the late 80s, early 90s. And one of the things that we started to see was what was called 419 crime, 419 scams. And they were cases where people would send letters to Americans, a lot of American citizens, but it was also abroad too. But they would send letters saying, you have this long lost relative here in Nigeria. You are going to unlock $186 million. Well, all you have to do to unlock it is pay this fee of $2,500. So that's where it started. Is this stuff predated much of the internet access in Nigeria. So once that happened, the scammers who were doing it realized how successful they were, and they just continued doing it. So once a lot of the Nigerians started to get access to the internet, the scammers now saw that they had another opportunity to target more people, and they could do it even more remotely. So that's where you started to see the cybercrime side coming up in Nigeria. So some of the things that play into that, that's going to touch on the geopolitical stuff too, is that a lot of the scammers who are known locally in Nigeria are called Yahoo Boys. So I want to say this first and foremost, that not all Nigerians are scammers. And that's a stigma that if you want to piss a Nigerian off, tell them Nigerians are scammers. Because they have a very strong sense of pride towards their country. And it's something where they don't like the damage that the scammers have done. But in addition to that, a lot of them need to realize that there actually has been a lot of damage done. So it's a double-edged sword on that. So from a political perspective, from a geopolitical perspective, You also have unemployment rates in Nigeria right now. They're over 50%. So it's something where literally half of the population does not have a job. And like we have here in the United States, how we have some fallbacks on the unemployment for unemployment. They don't have those fallbacks over there. So your choices in Nigeria are go and scam somebody or die. It's like that. That's exactly what it is. So a lot of the people now are forced with this moral conundrum, if you will, where they're like, okay, I can go and scam people in order to make a living, or try and do the right thing and not have a good life. And talking with many of the students over there in some of the universities, there's also a sense of peer pressure that plays into it too, where you have this person who will go and you may have this 14-year-old kid who has a really, really, really expensive car, dresses really flashy, and everybody wants to be him. So it's something where you have a lot of people want to go and get all this money. So it becomes a lot of other things that play into this. And that's a lot of the reason Nigeria gets the bad rap. But again, it's not just Nigeria. If I had to list my hit list, you have Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Nigeria, Ghana. You have some in South Africa, Malaysia, Dubai. Here in the States, you've got Mexico, you've got the Dominican Republic that plays into this. You've got scammers in Jamaica who are dabbling in similar stuff too. You've got some on the Russian side, but not as much in this context. So it's really, really, really a big geopolitical problem right now. And a lot of it, unfortunately, stems directly from poverty, where people just want to survive and just want to make a living.
Elise?
Yeah, I would agree with that. The Nigeria 419 scam really ruined it for all other nations, and Nigeria specifically, because it created that stereotypical scam type, which has just proliferated through everything since. And I think that this is something that I kind of tried to address with Fishy Little Liars, that, Todd the IT guy trying to reset your password is the Nigerian prince of phone phishing pretexts. And it just kind of happens to be one of those things where it was so effective that it gained so much popularity that people are hip to it. And now they understand that this is a common scam. I should avoid this. But what that does is it actually lowers people's defenses on other types of scams, because they say, oh, this doesn't seem like all these other scams that I'm aware of, so it's probably fine. And one of the questions from someone in the attendees today was, how to identify a scam. And we are going to talk about that closer to the end of this hour, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, great. And so one of the other things that I've read, right, is going back sort of to the geographic variety of this, is also the organizational dynamics of this, right? So when we think of, again, scammers, we're thinking large scale rings, right? Like the Nigerian scam networks, yes, right? They're pretty much like a well-oiled machine. They've got divisions of labor. There's that, but there's also smaller groups that can pull this off. There's individuals who can pull this off. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And for the larger networks also, like, what's the culture, right? Like we talk about sort of the socioeconomic and sort of the background of, what the political climates might be, but I'm talking about the scam culture itself, right? In terms of training, in terms of who's doing what, in terms of being provided with playbooks. Let's talk a little bit about those types of things.
I think anyone can be a scammer, first of all, and we've kind of addressed that, but there are small scale scams that happen every day. And unfortunately, humans have been manipulating and scamming each other since the beginning of time because of scarcity of resources and all kinds of other things. So one example of a scam that a friend of mine was a victim of is a young person in the Southwestern United States had put together this system where they extorted money from people via Apple Cash through iMessage, because any money that's transferred over iMessage is considered a gift. There's no recourse for any of the victim to claim fraud or get their money back. So what this person would do, and this was an individual under the age of 20, and they masterminded this whole thing more than likely mostly on their own. Maybe they had somebody who was doing something similar that gave them the idea, but this was an individual And what he did was he created a profile that fit the archetype of someone who was in a Facebook group with a specific interest, whether that was car parts or a certain kind of animal keeper or whatever. And in this particular instance, it was a car parts group for a specific type of vehicle. And what this person would do is they'd post a picture of a part that they wanted to sell, say a bumper, for example. And they would say, I've got this bumper, it's worth like $5,000, but it's at my uncle's shop and I really just need to get rid of it. I'm prepared to sell it for $1,500 plus shipping and, just to get rid of it. So here's a picture. Here's, my phone number. And they would send the picture, which had no actual identifying information other than being a picture of a bumper. And then they even would get on the phone with the victim and say, yeah, it's at my shop, I can ship it out and just go ahead and send me the money. And if the victim was like, well, I'd like to use PayPal, they'd be like, oh no, I can only accept the money through iMessage. Apple Cash is the only way to do this. And so they convince the person who wants this too good to be true deal on this piece of, a part or whatever, to send the money through iMessage. They accept the money because it accepts automatically when it's sent. There's no way to pull it back. And then they ghost the person who sent the money and block them. And they would hit, 10 or 15 people in the same Facebook group. And by the next morning, everybody's like, oh no, this is a scam. This guy won't respond to me. What's going on? And it turned out that the person was completely different from the images that were in the Facebook profile that they set up. And it escalated quickly. So he would get one person for $5,000, another person for $2,000. And this is how this person was making their living, was by scamming folks on Facebook. And there's no legal recourse whatsoever that the victims can take. And it just turns into this massive money generating machine for the scammer. So why on earth would they stop scamming? There's no incentive for them to stop at all.
And one thing on the legal recourse, like I would love to touch on that really quick. So when it comes to tracking this type of crime, there are certain limits, and I don't want to say the limits that are out there right now, but they're pretty high. And it's something where in order for something to be considered a federal case, you have to hit X amount of dollars. For it to be state, it has to be X amount of dollars. For it to be local, it has to be X amount of dollars. So what happens is at the federal level, in order to start tracking these crimes, you have to be able to lump a certain amount of victims up in order to hit that threshold. What happens is, because of the way the crime is, you have so many victims that are telling you different stories. It's actually difficult. It's really, really difficult to actually build a case on some of these cases, on some of these actors. Mm-hmm. So once you go down to the state level, the problem there is they don't have the resources to actually go after that. So it's something where it becomes extremely difficult for them to actually help the victims, even locally. Like I was talking to one of the law enforcement officers here, and I straight up asked him, I'm like, what do you guys do about romance victims? I knew the answer going into it. And he laughed. He's like, we can't do anything. And it's something where that's the problem, is that when you have a lot of these victims where it's like $2,500, $5,000 here, $8,000 here, a lot of those crimes don't even get touched. And it's something where there's a gap right there between where the federal stuff is and local stuff, where absolutely nothing is happening. And it's something where that's the problem, is a lot of these things are being taken all day long, and you can't really you can't do anything with them. So it's something where that's a lot of the problem, is that a lot of these cases just get stuck there, and it's like everyone's kind of putting their hands up, like we don't know what to do. And that's some of the hardest stuff to work, is like not being able to do anything, because I like fixing things. So
yeah. And I want to sort of go back to this idea of that culture again a little bit, right? And we talked about this. I've spoken with both of you about this in terms of how calculated is this, right? This idea of like really being a well-oiled machine. So you have, like I said, playbooks, getting training, right? All this stuff for the scammer end, right? Can you share your thoughts on some of these things, and why, it's also not necessarily reprimanded, right? We talked about that. Like if your options are do the scam or die, right? Like it's literally that. But how are they also training folks in this process? How are they initiating and training?
So for the training, it happens a couple ways. So if I'm just going to use Nigeria because, like I said, that's just where I study at this point. So again, not trying to upset anybody. But when it comes to working in Nigeria, it's publicly accepted, and a lot of the locals know who the Yahoo Boys are. They know who's in the scamming. They know who's into this stuff. So it could be as simple as some of the scammers coming and recruiting you and giving you a laptop, and then you do a blood sacrifice in order to continue working with the group. And that's usually how they'll recruit. When it comes to documentation, they're called scripts or formats, which are long bodies of text that they can use, that they can copy paste back and forth to their victims. It could be something like a pretext where it's for dating profiles. It can be a pretext for doing car wrapping scams where they're trying to wrap a decal on your car. There's dozens of things that they can do in order to try and do it. But like when it comes to actually educating, it's like all these documents are out there. And like once you start digging into a lot of the groups and a lot of the forums that are actually working with a lot of the romance scams, the scripts and texts and formats that they're using are already known. And in addition to that, like there's cases where you'll go and look up one thing on the scammer because they're like, hey, this scammer sent me this one thing. It looked a little odd, but you'll find out that that document was actually from a 2017 format that actually was written back in 2013. So it's like all the stuff is already out there on that. And then just I wanted to kind of mention one thing on culture too, because I did see the question here earlier. The question was around how does the government react to these things? So when it comes to this type of fraud, it's more accepted than not accepted in Nigeria. And in addition to that, you do have a lot of high-ranking officials who are involved in some level of cybercrime. If it's something where if they're trying to build relationships and do things with oil rigs, if they're trying to do things just to continue stealing money, like that's fairly well known. And in the Black Axe documentary, they actually pointed out that there were again, high-ranking government officials who are part of the Black Axe organization who are responsible for laundering money, and they will go and hire hitmen to go and take out their competition. They will go and rough up somebody who they're trying to vote against them just to kind of keep them there. And it's something where, like, especially Black Axe is as one organization, like there's a half dozen other ones like them. But like they will intentionally embed somebody within a high-ranking political official body just so that they have somebody in that seat, so they can kind of help keep ties on stuff and be like, hey, it's when you got this person over here who's being arrested, go help him out. Or you'll have cases where like Mumfa is a great case where he actually just went and paid, I think it was like $250,000 to get back out of jail after he was arrested. Back out on the streets, second time he was arrested. First time he was arrested was $280,000. So somebody somewhere pocketed that money and he's probably out somewhere else back in Dubai. So it's something where it's like it's known who they are, but because of the poverty, money talks a lot more over there. So if it's acceptable to pay a bribe here and there, whereas here it's like you would never do that. So, or less likely to do that. So,
Elise, your thoughts, right? From a social engineering sort of perspective, can these things be taught, right? This idea of manipulating and creating profiles, or all that kind of stuff. Is this something that you can train folks on? Is this happening?
I'm going to start from like the backside of my answer here. And I'm going to say, if you've ever had a retail sales job, you've been trained to manipulate people. So, for example, I worked for a major wireless carrier in a past life, and they would put you through like a week of sales training where you'd go to the nearest headquarters and go through formal sales training. And it was all about how to identify the vulnerability of your sales prospect and how to manipulate them into seeing the value of what you're selling, how to overcome their objections to not wanting to buy what you're selling, and then closing the sale. And this is not unlike anything that you've been subjected to when you go try to buy a used car from a dealership. This is all very similar as far as the tactics and the types of manipulation that are being used by these scammers. They're relying on your default human behavior and psychology to determine the outcome of the way that you're going to respond to what they ask for. And using enough of these different manipulators and creating this pattern with the target, that training is all pretty much scriptable. We would even be put through exercises where we would role play these types of tactics with another sales trainee. I guarantee that not only can these things be trained, but they are being trained, especially in the situations where you have call centers of people who are executing similar types of scams against similar types of targets that they've identified to use a common pretext with. They are all very much learning from each other, learning from the experience that they have on their previous engagements. Maybe it didn't work this time, but now they've learned what doesn't work, or that they pushed it too hard too fast, or that they didn't take time to build enough rapport. Those types of things it's all very similar to how an experienced car salesman would behave versus a junior or new salesperson would behave. And they're going to learn from each other just by being in the same proximity or being in the same organization, executing similar things. They're all going to learn from each other. There may not be formalized training. They may shadow somebody for a couple of weeks, but it's absolutely trainable. It's something that can very much be learned, whether it's on the job or through role playing and other types of formal or informal training. Reading books. There's plenty of books out there on psychology and influence and building trust and leadership, and all those things are very similar. And just using the right cocktail of manipulators and putting someone in a position where they feel like they're out of objections, they can no longer object. And as Ronnie mentioned earlier, they've been beat down into submission. They're just worn down and they're tired of fighting it. That's a position that someone can be trained to put another individual in fairly easily and fairly quickly.
And I would also argue that not only can you train humans to do that manipulation, you can train algorithms to do that manipulation too. Because if you look at the way certain media content is published and pushed out, it plays on certain emotions. And when it plays on those certain emotions, that person's going to click this piece of content. When they click on that piece of content, then whatever the algorithm knows, like, hey, they like this content, we're going to keep pushing it out. So it's not just a human thing. It's like you can literally train the bots and the machines and the algorithms to do that stuff for you. And it's once you actually take that step back and realize that literally everything in our lives is some form of manipulation one way or the other, it gets scary at that point. So it really kind of makes you realize, wait, you're just kind of like a little checkbox where someone can go and give you information and like make you try to click this thing. And if you click this out, so we're going to give you 15 other things. I'm like, it's a weird world out there right now. So
yeah, aren't you guys all glad that you came? I think that it's something that's always been a threat. And I think all of us, regardless of our backgrounds and, where we live, who we are, our, specific ways that we identify, all of that stuff is kind of irrelevant when you consider the fact that all of this stuff has always been there. I think we're just starting to see more media attention on it, especially as a result of the pandemic and this ginormous spike in these types of scams, especially via social media. People are lonely, they're trying to connect with other people, and the only way that they have been able to do that, and may continue to be able to do that, hopefully not, is through online means. So trying to connect with people through paid dating sites and trying to connect with people through social media, this is not going away. And I will liken it to the fact that I can't limit my kids from ever being on the internet. The only thing that I can do is to educate them to be aware and protect themselves, their identities, their personal information. Don't be too quick to trust. And I think that the same lessons can really be applied here. It's not a matter of being on or not being on a specific platform. It's not a matter of, just not connecting with people on the internet, because we don't really have a choice. It's just part of our lives now. It's really a matter of being alert, being aware, logically evaluating the reason why somebody is reaching out to you and what for, taking the time to deconstruct the relationship and evaluate it for what it is, and not let your emotional investment or your emotions impact your decision. And just kind of keeping folks at arm's length until you are extremely confident, you've met them in person, you've gone for coffee a couple times in a public place, you know that this person is real. And even then, probably don't take out a $25,000 loan and give them the cash.
Headline of Tinder swindler.
Yeah, and both of you raised some really good points, right? Ronnie, you talked about the algorithm side of things. Elise, you're like, these platforms are just not going away. So, and I think we have a question that's sort of come up here about like newer platforms, right? So one of the questions that I have is like, where are we headed, right? I read the other day, and military-based romance scams, that's another one that's pretty popular.
Oh yeah,
right?
we need to touch on that.
Actually, let's talk about that, but I'm gonna fire.
That's exactly where we're heading.
That's exactly where we're at.
But in VR, the VR dumpster fire.
But let's talk about the military cons, and I also want to talk about so the one particular case that I read that I thought was fascinating was this. The victim she thought she was obviously talking to someone who posed as someone in the US military, but she was actually engaged in a Skype conversation. So this was real time, but later it was discovered that it was actually a deep fake that she was having a conversation with in real time, right? So let's talk about the military scams. Let's talk about also, sort of where are we headed? Like deep fakes, like what's going on?
Oh man, deep fakes. So deep fakes scare the snot out of me, to be honest with you. I don't know how we're going to. You've got people out there that unfortunately want to believe so hard that they would be willing to believe that they'd connected with a celebrity who was being deep faked and believe excuses like, I'm sorry, I'm filming in Dubai right now, so I can't meet in person. And, all of these things to us seem completely obvious as a red flag, but in a scenario where somebody is just so desperate to make that connection and to believe the lie that they're being told, unfortunately there's always going to be victims that want to believe that the fabricated truth is the truth so hard that they're willing to put themselves at risk. And it's tough. I know that there was a question about how to educate people, what medium to use. Discussions like this are fantastic, but again, you're going to have people that are just so emotionally invested in this relationship that despite the fact that they know deep down that something isn't quite right, it's almost like it's too late for them to course correct on their own. And then what do you do? I mean, you're talking about essentially staging an intervention, and it's similar, I think, to we're all addicted to this universe of social media right now. And I know Ronnie has much more information on this, but the oxytocin and, the feel good hormones that get released, the dopamine that comes from getting those likes and clicks and messages, you see that somebody, sent you an I love you text in the morning, and that dopamine is what's fueling this addiction to this relationship. You can't take somebody to rehab who doesn't want to go and have it be successful. So trying to get ahead of these things, I think, is our best bet, really educating people as far as what the red flags and the warning signs are so that it is a natural reaction. A lot of us looked at the sugar daddy scammy messages and we're like, well, obviously, but there are some people that they're so completely desperate for money or attention or whatever, that they're willing to kind of push those concerns aside. We need to make it okay for people to question the nature of their reality, especially on social media and over the phone or text message, even in person, because there are some scammers that are just that good. I know that this has been getting a lot of attention too with the recent documentary, but a lot of us think that scammers come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and that's not always the case. I think many of us will, have a relationship that we can think of in our past that is similar to some of the stuff that I went through in my early 20s when I was learning how to be an adult. And, you know, you have the manipulative significant others, the people that kind of cut you off from your family and friends and try to shape the way that you view them and the world, and make sure that you don't have the opportunity to have somebody give you a reality check. I think Hugh Hefner is an excellent example of that. And this individual, whether you wish to believe it or not, folks have come forward to say that he was extremely manipulative, and the women who were in his care or supposed relationship with him were manipulated. They had a curfew. They were pitted against each other. They were constantly in a state of feeling like they were seeking his validation and in competition with other people and not good enough. And he severely impacted their self-confidence and their ability to behave as individuals. And all of this manipulation didn't just happen overnight. It happened over the course of years, to the point where they felt completely helpless to get out of this relationship. So this isn't limited to online relationships. It can absolutely be something that comes out of a real relationship that people feel is real and valid. And maybe there is, you know, affection and caring there in the beginning, but over the course of time, things degrade. So I know we're talking about scammers, but I don't want to diminish the fact that this could absolutely happen, and these tactics are being leveraged by people in real relationships in real life as well. So having awareness of what constitutes like an online scammer type romance scam relationship can also help you to identify other, you know, toxic or negative relationships that you have, whether that's with friends or family or significant others. I don't think it makes too much of a difference.
Mm-hmm. And on the psychology side, there's also a ton of psychology that talks on abusive relationships and why people stay in the relationship. So it's something where, but you nailed it. It's hard for people to want to speak up on that. And in addition to that, it's something where there is a very strong link between someone who's trying to stay in an abusive relationship and somebody who's in a romance scam. There's a psychologist out in Australia. Her name is Monica Whitty. She actually surveyed romance victims and works with them and has done so for like the last decade, if I remember right. But some of the research that she found was, and this is what kind of got my wheels turning, was that some of the things that she found, the information and things that go on physiologically with somebody who was mentally and emotionally abused are the exact same signs physiologically and emotionally in a romance victim. So when it comes to the damage to the human being, they are one and the same. Like there is no difference. There is no differentiation on that. They're identical. So the good thing is knowing that, and going forward, there's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of resources in order to start working on that. And I mentioned the brain chemicals, oxytocin, the dopamine, the serotonin. And what happens is when someone shows you love and affection, your body releases those. And for a lot of these victims, they end up getting love bombed, where they get hit so hard with these emotions, and they have so many people saying so many positive things. They get that morning text message, "Hey, how are you? I love you." And it's something where it makes you feel good. That's how we are as humans, is we enjoy that and everything. And that's not bad. It's when that gets constantly badgered and abused and starts burning out those receptors, if you will, that becomes a problem. Because when you go and threaten to take that away, if you will, I don't want to draw too much of a correlation between an addict, but your body does go through withdrawal symptoms. And it's something where that withdrawal that your body goes through, again, is something very similar to where we don't want to be in pain. When you go and look at people who are heroin addicts and everything, when you go and read their accounts, it's the exact same thing, where they become so conditioned to not want the high, they try to take the drugs to not have to deal with the withdrawals, because the withdrawals are so horrible. So again, it's something where we will do whatever we can not to be in pain. And even if it's something where staying in that scam, we don't have to come to the realization and actually admit that we were tricked. And again, I know we've touched that like a dozen times, everything, but like that's one of the big things to take away, is that there's a whole lot more going on here than just that side of it. So
yeah. And I do want to touch a little bit upon, we talked at the very, very beginning of this session today, numbers that just went up, right? Especially during the pandemic. So can we talk about the context-specific nature of some of these things and how what's going on, right, is being leveraged? So obviously, scams, the romance scam was there before, but why did it just get a lot worse? So if we could talk about that and how is that being used, right, in conning people?
So on why it got worse, there was this little thing that happened back in 2019 called the global pandemic. No, but in all seriousness,
not sure if you're aware.
Oh yeah. Just in case anybody's been living under a rock in their last 3 years, sorry for the news, Pop. And also funny topic on that. If you've never seen Julie Nolke's rendition of her talking to her former self in regards to the pandemic, highly recommend it. It's like one of the funniest skits you'll watch. Like totally off topic. But back to the topic and everything. But the reason it happens is very much that we're all isolated, we're all alone, we're all worried about what's going to happen, we're all scared, no one knows what's going on, and those are feelings that we're all having. And it's something where when you become that isolated, you become vulnerable, and like it's that straight on it. So
just like all the remote employees I target with my phishing.
Yeah, and we talked also a little bit about sort of what's going on with the victims, what they can perhaps do, right, or their families can do. We talked a little bit about the legal difficulties, right, for why this is hard to curb. And so I guess I now want to explore, well, what can the platforms do, right, through which this is happening, be it dating sites, be it social media apps like TikTok, Instagram, right? Because I think I mentioned to both of you yesterday, we just had this happen, right, in Philly and Montgomery County, where 17, 18, 19-year-old boys thought they were talking to girls and sent them sort of racy images through Instagram that were now being used to sextort them, right? So like what are platforms doing? All types of platforms. Can we have a little conversation about that?
Honestly, I don't think that the platforms can keep up. Scammers and attackers in general are always going to find ways to mitigate safety and precautions that are set up. This is one of the reasons why the scammers often try to move people into a direct messaging app, whether it's iMessage or WhatsApp or something that's direct and off of, the dating platforms and the social media platforms. It's really tough to try to put community standards in place over people's direct messages. There's no way to monitor that without severe privacy implications, right? So there's no way that I feel a social media platform could be expected to monitor that or to do anything about it. And, the community standards for Twitter are a lot different than Instagram and Facebook. WhatsApp has the probably the most difficult to manage setup because of the fact that it is purely direct messaging. I don't know that we can hold those organizations accountable to try to mitigate these types of scams beyond maybe account verification tools that would allow people to know that they're trusted, their account's been verified by the platform owners. But then at the same time, you've got account takeovers that happen. And I myself have been approached by, very trusted LinkedIn profiles that were paid recruiters whose accounts had been compromised and taken over, and were sending phishing messages through direct LinkedIn messages with links to Office 365 credential phishing websites. So it just goes back to that. I can't put, safety rails and, bubbles around my kids. They have to learn how to survive in this world that we live in. And sometimes adults are at a little bit of a disadvantage because sometimes these newer technologies and things come out when we already feel like we've got a pretty good handle on what our universe is capable of. So just continuing to raise awareness and educate people on the new attack vectors that are out there, what signs to watch out for, You've probably seen 100 of these on Facebook where it's, the scam of the day that's being publicized in a new public Facebook post and people are spreading it around to try to raise awareness. While it seems silly, those things might prevent, my mother-in-law, for example, from falling victim to one of these types of scams. So I think every means of raising awareness is valid. Everyone is going to hear the message a different way. And a different method or media may speak to them or finally get through to them. So there's no wrong way to do it. But it all boils down to not making anybody responsible for your destiny aside from yourself, and learning how to protect yourself and guard your heart and not let your emotions dictate your decisions, how you react and behave to other people. I know Ronnie mentioned it before, take a flipping break, put the phone down and go seriously consider how you're going to respond to something before you make an emotional response or, jump off the edge and go down a rabbit hole you don't want to go down.
And even if you're not a victim, take a break, put the phone down, go take a break for 3 days. You'll thank me later.
One of the things that I've
take
also
a walk.
a nice little
in
walk,
the outside.
Right? Yeah, wait, there's
nice.
Outside? There's a thing out there?
I do want to talk a little bit about the victims feeling embarrassed or foolish or ashamed, right? Like, how could you have fallen for something like that? I know when I sort of talk about these types of things in my classroom, even, right? You do get that response back. It's like, how could you, did you not know? So what, I guess, cultural shift, if you will, right? What do you think needs to be done to support them and to do a better job, right? Because, and who wins? The scammers win in this, right? Because that also compounds the fact that, well, we don't have enough evidence, for instance, because people just don't come forward. So what needs to happen? What recommendations do you have?
I would probably say a level of acceptance and understanding and even acknowledgement that we're all individuals. We all have feelings. Yeah, we mess up and everything, and you fess up to it. That's it. And it's like those and simply being awesome to each other. And it's something where like a lot of people just don't realize that those things exist, or you might have different perspectives and stuff, whatnot. But like at the end of the day, it's like we all mess up. We're all humans. Like we're by design, we mess things up. So it's something where like we need to realize that sometimes you don't know what somebody else is going through. So just be nice, be kind to them, and just lead with compassion, like in general, because it's something where it's, like I said, you don't know what somebody else is going through. You don't know what happened back at home that they're sitting there noodling over. And it's just something where it's like, just be nice.
Yeah, I'll absolutely echo that. I think our society as a whole here in the United States anyway is starting to become more accepting of asking for help and support with mental health issues. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that people will feel more comfortable asking for help when it comes to these types of situations. But maybe have someone that you trust review something. If something starts to seem a little weird, and we'll talk about those red flags in a minute, but something starts to seem a little weird, take some screenshots, send it to somebody who you trust, whether that's a parent or a sibling or a close friend, and just be like, does this sound fishy to you? And just like those remote employees that didn't have the ability to stand up in their cubicle and go, hey, did somebody call from such and such? And, trust but verify. You kind of get that second opinion from somebody who's removed from the situation and isn't impacted by those same emotional, commitments and the consistency and all the behavior elements that we've talked about before. Just get a second opinion. And that's a good way to kind of, keep yourself in check, so to speak, so you don't make any terrible decisions because you allow yourself to get carried away with those emotional things. But, things are not usually what they seem. What you see on the surface or what's published or publicized or openly available in the public is not always the truth. And so having a second set of eyes or making sure that you fully understand, the scope of what's happening can also help you evaluate a situation a little bit more critically. I mean, if it's somebody asking to be your sugar daddy and you've never said anything that would really raise that as something that you're seeking or requesting, that's probably a pretty good indicator that this is weird. But just taking a moment, I mean, try the reverse image search on the profile. You meet somebody on a dating platform and you go look up their social media, try to see if any of those pictures come from somewhere else, or if they seem a little photoshoppy or a little too perfect, or if only those 12 pictures are on all of their social media accounts and nothing seems organic and natural. Those types of things would cause me to be suspicious. And that's one way that you can kind of get a grasp on whether or not something's real before you get emotionally invested in the conversation and the relationship.
Yeah. And relatedly, I think, we're sort of, I'm going to ask you sort of end with, well, what can we do? But before that, I just have one other, sort of question is, if you're not being conned yourself, right, but you feel like somebody else is, what are those telltale signs, right? Like, what should you be looking for? Right, because they're not maybe going to be able to figure out that they're being swindled. We've talked about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you looking for to be able to go like, I better go check in with this person?
I would say reduced activity on social media, number one, because they're distracted by something else, and that's what's giving them that dopamine, oxytocin rush and feeding that need for those things chemically. So they kind of disappear. If it's somebody that you've been messaging pretty regularly, like you talk every day or every 2 or 3 days or once a week, and they just kind of reduce that frequency of communication or stop communicating with you at all, and you're fairly certain that you didn't do anything to offend them, especially, I would reach out. If you notice somebody is suddenly absolutely smitten with someone and the I love yous are flying all over the place, they're moving to Spain together, they're selling the house. I mean, like there's like significant life changes that are all happening seemingly too quickly. And I mean, take that with a grain of salt, because I literally moved in with my spouse 2 weeks after meeting him, and everything worked out all right. But this is something that you may want to just evaluate to make sure that it's not something that should be scary or to be concerned about. If they're making really huge sweeping life decisions, or like they quit their job and they're moving towns, or they're going to move in with this person, that's a take a step back and let's talk about this scenario, not necessarily condemnation of what they're doing. And just a big shift in the way that they engage with you. If they seem like a slightly different person, whether they are all of a sudden full of confidence and they've never really been that way before, or they're super duper happy and optimistic and positive after being pretty depressed and unhappy and lonely for a long time, this can all kind of be a sign that something's changed and it's worth exploring. I'm not saying that it's necessarily like, oh my gosh, they're being romance scammed. But these changes in behavior are something that you want to watch out for, and just ask for more information. Reach out. Are you okay? Ask for some more information. I've noticed that this was the way it was, and now this is the way it is. How are things going? And kind of keep that conversation open. You don't want to get accusatory or make them become defensive, because then they're definitely going to shut down, just like your teenager who doesn't want to talk to you. Just make sure that you approach the conversation from a place of, being a trusted friend and ally, rather than, trying to be accusatory or, classify them in a certain way, like you're being scammed, like this person is bad. Those things, you need to reserve those comments for later in the conversation.
And the problem is, if you do become that abrasive and stuff and whatnot, one of the things that people don't consider is they don't consider for the fact that the victims truly do believe they're in a relationship. So for them and their mind, in their world, for everything that they're going through, they truly and utterly believe, like all the way deepest down within inside them, that they really are in this relationship. So to an outside observer, it's something where they may see that relationship and be able to question it and be like, no, that's fake. You're dumb. You shouldn't be doing that. And that's a lot of stigmas that I've seen with law enforcement. So it's something where being abrasive, being tough on them, like that's the worst thing you can do, because like you said, with your teenage kid, they will shut down, period, and you get nothing out of them. So yeah, approach it with kindness, approach it with compassion, approach it with love, and just be as kind and gentle as you can, just to kind of work with them and realize that they have a lot going on, and there is a lot of shame that goes with it too, of being a victim. And it's like they don't want, and we don't want to admit that we're wrong, but by working with them and showing them that, no, I'm going to be here and I'm going to actually listen to you, that does go a very long way with working with a victim.
Yeah. And I guess, we'll get to that point, right, where we're sort of wrapping things up, but I have 2 questions now for you all, right? So one is, how do you protect yourself, right? And where do you go for help? So we've hinted a little bit at each of these things, but I want to have a more concrete conversation about this. And I want to look at victimization two sort of ways, right? One is obviously you've been swindled. And the other one is if your identity was used, right? Like we see, for instance, with the military or romance scams, and a lot of their identities being used. So it's different types of victimization. So where can you go and how can you protect yourself?
So for where you can go, I just posted a bunch of resources in the chat, so I think people can see that. So feel free to copy paste that. There was another article that actually came out from Brian Krebs when his identity was stolen. One of the things he said was just freeze your credit. So it's something where once you start giving your social security number, your credit cards and all that out to the scammers, they will use it and register forever they can. So like once you start getting to that point, like freezing your credit is the first thing you should do. And not just with one of the offices, freeze it with all of the credit, with all 3 credit agencies and stuff. And just do a hard cold block on that and everything. And that will help prevent that. So
yeah, blocking your credit is huge, and blocking it is super easy to do. You can do it all online with all 3 of the credit bureaus. And what that does is it forces a cooling off period for you, even if you get emotionally manipulated into trying to co-sign on a car for somebody. For example, you're going to have to actually go and unlock your credit to enable that transaction to happen. And it's going to build in that buffer of time to allow you to evaluate the situation for what it is and not get swept up in what you're being told and how you're being manipulated. Even if you want to avoid getting suckered into buying that used car on the lot, it's a great tactic for you to employ just to protect yourself, to not make emotionally driven decisions. I think there's a question about the worst examples of scams that we have personally fallen for. I have never told anyone this.
So let's do it on a live webinar.
So let's do it on a live webinar. When I was 20 years old, I worked in retail, and there was a person who decided to get close to one of my coworkers for the purpose of getting close to me. Eventually, he manipulated me into seeing him as a wonderful guy, and we started dating. And he told me that he was getting a divorce, that his former wife and he lived together still because he didn't have enough money to move out yet, and he was helping to raise their son. And his former wife worked the night shift and I worked the day shift. And after, again, I want to stress, I was 20 years old and I just moved to the States a year ago. I was super naive. I grew up very sheltered, and I believed everything that this person told me. And I was completely in love with him. So he moved me into the house. There was the master bedroom that the wife lived in and the other spare bedroom that I lived in. We worked opposite shifts. And the scam from a romance perspective was he isolated me from all my friends. He isolated me from my family. Once he won my mom over and convinced her that he was wonderful and he was going to, move us to the big city and help me get back to college and do all these things that I wanted to do with my life, and just all these like major, massive promises, right? So he manipulated me into believing that he was fantastic, and then isolated me from all my friends and family completely lied to me about the true nature of his relationship with his legal wife. And I packed up all my things into a vehicle, and we were leaving town within a matter of like 24 to 48 hours when he got into a fight with his wife. And I was at work, and anyway, after much drama, what ended up happening is he and his wife got into a physical altercation where he pulled the phone line out of the wall. And I had squirreled myself away in a bedroom with their 2-year-old to protect the 2-year-old. And he made us leave in a hot hurry. We went down to like a Starbucks to regroup. And then the cops arrested him out of my car within like 20 seconds of us leaving the Starbucks. Like, they were just waiting for us to leave, but they'd been watching the place. The reason why I'm telling you this is because they arrested him. I immediately contacted a friend and went over to their house, and I was like, I can't believe this. This is such garbage. He's such a nice guy. Why are they doing this to him? And I knew for a fact, like I knew, like I saw his, bruised knuckles. I knew what happened, and still I was unwilling to admit that this person was bad, that they'd manipulated me, that they were in the wrong. It was a horrible situation. And I learned so much from it. And the great thing about it is now in retrospect, it really impacted my ability to evaluate relationships with people going forward. But, if you can avoid going through something like that, it's probably the better option. But yeah, I completely defended him. It took me like a long time, like in the actual reality of the timeline of events following that arrest, for me to really admit that he was wrong. Eventually, his wife contacted me for a statement of what happened, and I wrote it all out, and he was put in jail, which is great. But I didn't use my real name online for a long time. I later met somebody who he shared a cell with who said that he was going to kill me. And there was a lot of drama that resulted from that relationship. But the arc of events is very much the same as a lot of these abusive and also online scamming relationships, where they offer you the world. They manipulate everyone around you to believe that they're the best thing that's ever happened to you. Then they cut you off from the people who could actually see logically and critically that this relationship is bad news. And they try to get you away from the environment that you're comfortable and established in, to keep you kind of on your toes and dependent on them. He really wanted to make me 100% codependent on him for, everything. And that's why that move was part of the plan. And thank goodness it didn't actually happen.
Honey, you got a story to share?
I was gonna say not anywhere near that. But yeah, I'm glad you got out of that situation. Glad you're on this side now. But for me, one of the worst things I'd say, I'd say two things. So the handle most people know me as is I Heart Malware. I have accidentally run malware on a corporate system before. Thankfully, it was blocked. It got banned and stuff and whatnot. But like, we all accidentally infect our work PCs from time to time. The second one, when we moved out here to a rural place where I live right now, but don't want to say where I live on a webinar, we have a wood burning stove. And when you buy your wood, you usually buy it in a cord. And for those who aren't familiar with what a cord of wood is, it's a 4 foot by 4 foot by 8 foot is what it is. And it's that stacked. And usually your running price for that is usually between 150 and $200. So we responded back to an ad, and I tried to get the person to come on out to come and do the delivery and stuff and whatnot. And he was advertising it as, or the way I read it was 2 cords of wood for $300, which I'm like, great, that's gonna be awesome. So he ends up, I call, make the negotiation. He comes, drops out of the house and everything. And like looking, I'm like, that ain't a cord of wood and stuff and whatnot. He's like, oh no, no, we need to go do some more and stuff. We need to go do more. And my dad, who's a police officer, he was out here at the time. He's like, let's measure it out. So that's what we did, was we measured it out 4 by 4, and we went ahead and looked at it and everything laid out and everything. Like, yeah, that's not even like a quarter of a cord. So a truck came back and everything, and he saw that we had marked it out, and you could just see, he's like, oh crap. where he's like, they measured it out and stuff. So he knew we had got him. So he came back with another load of wood. And after the third load and everything, like, we're looking at him like, this isn't even a cord, man. And like the wood that he gave, it was like very light. It was like covered in mud. It was junk wood and stuff and whatnot. So it was one of those ones where we had a little bit of a discussion right there and everything. He was like, well, we were set up by the truckload. It's expensive for me to do this and everything. I'm like, I bought 2 cords of wood. You didn't sell me 2 cords of wood. I'm like, I don't care how much it costs you or anything. I'm like, I bought 2 cords of wood. So I ended up writing my check for $300 and just giving it to him. I'm like, all right, just go, whatever. We'll just cut it as a loss. So it was something where financially it was frustrating at the time, but lesson learned, make sure you get your wood from a trusted source. So
yeah, if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
So gonna wrap things up now. And I want to ask both of you, what message do you have for our attendees, right? What's that grand sort of last thought that you'd like to share with everyone as we wrap things up today?
Be awesome to each other, because you never know what somebody else is going through. You never know what problem someone's going through or is working on. And like at the end of the day, so many things in our society come down to people just not respecting each other or wanting to even consider working with somebody else. And it's like, that's what we need, is just be awesome to each other. Like not just in romance scams, not just in all these types of cyber crimes, like all across the board. So that's my message. Be awesome to each other.
I love that, by the way, and I think it's going to be tough to follow, but I was just going to say your gut's stupid. Don't trust your gut. So I'm going to share a couple slides really quick, just with some key takeaways. Hopefully I don't share anything weird. Let me know if you can't see that stuff. So essentially I've got 2 slides of stuff. I'm happy to share these after the fact, and I may even just like make an image out of them and tweet them later. But essentially, top ways that you can spot a romance scam, and actually a lot of other scams too, but romance scams specifically, they don't want to meet you in person. They always have excuses as to why they can't meet you in person, especially if they say they're local. They make plans to meet up, but they always flake, or plans change, or they get busy with work, that kind of stuff, to avoid actually meeting up. Their pictures seem unnatural, or they're just too good, like too photoshopped and filtered and stuff. Parts of their stories are conflicting. If you start to catch them in small lies, it will probably turn into big lies, or things that conflict with each other. Like they said they were here, but last week they said they were there during that same period, that kind of stuff. They are quick to do the love bombing that Ronnie was talking about. Lots of I love yous, like major emotional romantic displays, and just, straight to love. Then of course they need to borrow money or ask for money as a gift to fix a problem. Those problems can range quite a bit between what type of problem it is that they need the money for, but just problems in general. They ask to move the conversation to a private messaging app from a public social media network or a paid dating service very quickly. Things like, well, it's just such a pain for me to check Twitter DMs. Can we move this over to WhatsApp instead? Watch out for laying it on super thick with the romantic gestures, like sending flowers, asking for your address is a huge problem, that kind of stuff. They offer very detailed information and private information really quickly. Like they're talking about past relationships and, just very personal things really early on. It's usually part of a script and not somebody who's genuinely trusting you enough to share their innermost thoughts and, past experiences. They use or are always down on, they're always down on their luck. I'm going to fix that typo later. Or they're struggling with something. So they're kind of setting you up to feel empathy for them and to sympathize and to want to help them. And they can't be Googled. So when you Google them, you can't really find much on them. They don't seem to have any online presence, whether that's past or current. They just kind of don't exist. There are very few people that have managed to escape the interwebs and having some kind of, job or other type of history. But if you do Google them and you find stuff and it just doesn't really add up, or you can't find things to substantiate certain social media profiles that aren't just other social media profiles, then that may also be another indicator that something's not quite right. So again, I'm going to fix that typo, and then I'll share these out over Twitter as images too.
Great, thank you so much. So that's everything that we have for you folks today. Thank you everyone for attending and asking us all of your fantastic questions. Thank you, Elise and Ronnie. What a wonderful conversation. As always, I have such a blast when I'm speaking with the two of you. So I hope I can snag you once again in the future, or many, many times in the future, to have more important conversations. So thank you for all of your, thank you for all of your, insights and for your time today.
Yeah, it was great to meet you, Ronnie, and thanks so much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
Yep, nice to meet you too.
All right, so we're gonna X out, folks. Take care. Bye.
Have a great end of the week, everyone.